Okay, so this time we are going to use Mudbox to take a look at making more specific textures and other attributes that we can use to create different effects with different kind of textures. Well, what we're going to do for this one is take a look over here under Stencils, and we're going to take a look at doing this brick wall. Now, the brick wall here, as we can see, it's not exactly the best. We can still do all the stuff with it, but it's not quite exactly what we need. But let's see what we can do with it first. Well, to make this work, the first thing we're going to need to do is check just a couple things. Well, first off, I'm going to go ahead and turn this off for the moment. And if I do just a quick paint on here with Sculpt, I can see that I'm deforming way more than I need. So I'm going to go ahead and bring my strength down. That's probably about right. But I also am going to need way more subdivisions if I'm going to go ahead and do something that's going to look a little more brick wall-like. So in doing so, I'm going to add new levels until I get to level 6. From here, I'm going to want to make sure I do this head on, so I'm going to go orthographic and choose the top. So in doing so, it'll allow me to go ahead and use this stencil to try to shape it and get it to sit on here just right. However, as you'll note, the plane that we have and the stencil don't really fit if we want something with a few smaller bricks. So there's two ways we can go about this. Well, the first is to just do the best we can, fill in one edge, one side, just do our best to get it to line up about like this, and then move the stencil down and finish up on the bottom. But we have another option we can work with. Well, inside the stencil options over here, we have this one called Use Tiles. Now, this isn't bad, but this is a bad map to use with it, because you'll note, and I'll just go ahead and zoom out, that you can see this seam edge right through here, and even the verticals about here where things just don't line up. Well, for this first run, we'll go ahead and do it just as is, and I'm just going to go ahead and paint over this, and you'll see with the stencil I have quite a bunch of detail that it's pulling from that image to paint that image and modify my plane according to that texture. Well, overall, I mean, it's not terrible. It's pretty good, but I'm going to go ahead and turn this off and take a look at this. Well, I have a couple issues. If I look at it, you'll see that the grout on the inside is what was actually pulled up. Well, the brick is sitting backwards. Well, that's kind of the opposite of what I need. So I'm going to hit undo, turn this on again, but this time I'm going to click this, Invert Values, which is going to let me flip the lights and the darks. So instead I'm going to pull out the brick, but the lighter color, the grout in the middle of the brick, is going to be pulled far less. So in doing so, by hitting that flip values, I'm able to go ahead and pull the brick instead of the grout because the brick is darker. Now, I will have some issues in here, and I'll turn this off, that you can see right through here, going along this edge, and down here again, right through here, from where this tiling on this specific brick texture just really didn't work for making this thing fit. Now, if it's just in the background, well, you're not going to see it too much, so it's probably not that bad, realistically speaking. But for something more accurate, this is something that is hard to overlook if you're going to be closer up to it. So I'm going to hit undo again and get rid of that. Now, I already have an image ready to go, but I'm going to hit this little arrow here, add stencil, and on my desktop I have a seamless brick wall texture. What that means is that when it applies the used tiles, the edges of it can't easily be recognized. Now, if I pull this to zoom out, and even try to zoom in, we can kind of see some color patterns that do line up. But if we have just something closer to this size, we lose a lot of that repeated pattern appearance. But it also will allow me to go ahead and apply this brick wall texture almost to any size that I want. And it will keep those details, but it won't let us see that difference in the coloration, or at least not yet. Here in just a moment, I'll add the next step of doing this. But the main thing we need to do is make sure that we do not change anything about the camera, or if we really want to be careful, we could set up a specific camera bookmark to this spot. So I will add camera bookmark. We would want to normally just give it a realistic name, but I'm going to just give it that one for the moment just to keep things nice and simple for me. But now that I have that on here, I'm ready to go to my paint tools. Well, we have two things, paintbrush and projection. Paintbrush is going to take whatever I see here as the image and paint this onto my mesh. The problem is, however, it is pulling it from that gray color, so we're getting something like this. Instead, what we want to use is projection, which will allow us to, and actually I need to change this, not invert the values this time, so I can paint this color directly onto the mesh. And yes, if you do forget to choose to uncheck that invert color, you will paint the opposite color, which, realistically speaking, can give you some neat effects, but for trying to make this specific brick wall texture, we don't want to do that. But now that I have that done, I'll go and turn off this, and I'm going to examine my work. Okay, so I zoom into it, and ignore the clipping down here, that just happens. I'll go ahead and set this back to perspective. And now I won't get that clipping. But as I look at this, overall, my deformation might have been a bit much, but I'm actually happy with this overall. And back from a distance, and a bit more of a realistic view of seeing this, yeah, I'm happy with that. Yep, I have a pretty good looking brick wall texture. Now if I'm looking at it from this side here, I definitely could have used some shrinkage on the actual deforming here, but that's why we would normally add sculpting layers to adjust for these different settings. Well, this is good for the basic usage, but we can do just a little bit more with it. So next up, I'm going to go ahead. Yep, I'm happy with it. I'm going to go ahead and undo a lot of this just before I actually deformed this main portion there. Because with the projection and painting, I can do one more specific detail and change on this that I think is actually kind of fun to do. So I'm going to just go simple, big brush, and I'm going to paint over this and go around it a couple times just to get all the colors and everything painted on here. Okay. So now that I have this paint effect up here, and actually first let me go and turn off my stencil, but I have this. And it did look a little shiny from that view, but that was mostly just the scene lighting making that effect over the eye. But for now, I have this brick texture. And we know that it's just painted on there flatly. Well, we have other tools that we can use to help us create that deformed bumpness with just the paint texture. So I have this one up here under paint for my layer, paint layer 1. I'm going to just go ahead and name it base paint. And we'll say brick paint. But I can right click on it and I got all these options in here. What I'm going to do is just come here and say duplicate selected. So now I got brick paint and brick paint copy. Now the more detailed it is, the slower it might happen, but overall we don't need to worry. The neat thing we can do with this is this, move selected to. With move selected to, I'm going to choose this, a bump map. And it'll take the system to work just a moment on it, but you can now see that it changed and added just a little bit of a bump to this based on the texture itself and what we painted. So without even doing a legitimate sculpt on it, we are able to use this same effect to go ahead and add some detail, add some roughness, and just overall effects to this brick wall texture with simply painting over the material. Now, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of these, and we'll see kind of how we can use all of this together to go ahead and... Give me just one moment for the system to catch up. And we'll kind of combine all of it into one using this camera bookmark. So I set it up just to have this as a set thing. So I'm going to go into my settings for my basic sculpting brush, and I'm going to change my strength to something much lower than it was before with like roughly a 1. Hold B, change my brush size just so it's a little bit lower, and I will go over this. Just nice, simple, quick, and easy. Okay, so I've done that. I'll turn off the stencil for the moment, double check what I did, and yep, that works. Bookmarks, click that same one, returns me exactly to the setup I had before. Next up, paint tools, projection, and I will paint this texture. Oop, I forgot to invert my thing, or rather uninvert it. Paint this over my mesh. Okay. Turn off my stencil. And with this painted, the stencil off, we can get a better look at it. I'll switch back to perspective view. And I got just a little bit of deformation on there. Kept the information pretty nicely. But I'm going to take it just a little bit further and do that same duplicate. Give it just a moment to catch up. I'm also going to hit W to turn off wireframe for just the moment and send this to a bump map. And this gives us a nice detailed roughness to this entire thing. Because now I have the physical big space differences from the sculpt, and assigned to the same exact spots are now this texture as both a bump mapping over it as well as mixing very nicely with that sculpt. And now, even looking at it from the side, it'll keep all those details, and it won't have that awful appearance that we did the last time when we just did mostly the sculpt and the basic projection painting. So, that completes using a basic stencil to create a brick wall, but next time we'll see what we can do with another object. So that's all for this one, and I'll see you in the next one. Have a good night.